The studio buzzed with a different kind of anticipation. Governor Gavin Newsom, impeccably dressed and radiating California cool, had just walked in, clearly expecting to own the narrative. Across the table sat Jonathan Roumie, an unexpected political voice, his posture calm, eyes steady, and a quiet intensity that belied the public's perception of him as just an actor. The segment was supposed to be about California's economic future, but the underlying tension suggested something far more personal. From the very first minute, Newsom ditched the polite script. He leaned forward, his voice smooth but edged with an almost theatrical disdain. "You're nothing more than a Hollywood script reader, Mr. Roumie," he said, letting the words hang in the air like a dismissive pronouncement. A celebrity playing politician. The audience gasped, some laughing nervously, others leaning forward, captivated by the unexpected barb. Jonathan didn't flinch. He just maintained a steady gaze, a slight, almost imperceptible lift of an eyebrow, as if assessing whether this insult even merited his energy. His composed stillness only made Newsom look more eager for a reaction. This wasn't just a random jab, it was calculated. By framing him as a script reader, Newsom was trying to delegitimize Roumie's credibility before the debate even began, positioning him as an unserious outsider. But here's the thing about Jonathan Roumie. He's not the type to take a hit and let it slide. If anything, such dismissals seemed to sharpen his focus. The camera zoomed in, capturing every subtle movement of his face. He didn't smile in amusement. Instead, a look of profound, almost sorrowful conviction settled on his features, the kind that suggests he's already decided how he's going to speak an inconvenient truth. And judging by his expression, he wasn't just planning on defending himself. He was about to flip the entire narrative. Viewers at home could feel it. You know that moment in a political debate where you just know someone's about to be exposed? This was it. But here's the question, and I want you to think about this. When a politician gets personal instead of sticking to the facts, is it a sign of confidence or a sign they've already lost the argument? Jonathan took a slow breath, leaned in slightly, and opened his mouth to speak. And that's when the entire tone of the room shifted. Jonathan's voice came out resonant, almost calming, but with an underlying authority that made you instinctively sit up straighter. "Governor, if I'm a script reader, it's because I've spent my life studying the human condition, learning to speak truth through character. Truths you, it seems, find increasingly inconvenient." The audience reacted instantly. A few people clapped, some laughed in disbelief, and the camera caught Newsom shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Jonathan didn't just take the insult and deflect. He reframed it into a critique of Newsom's perception of reality. He continued, locking eyes with him. "I didn't inherit a political dynasty, Governor, or navigate a traditional path to power. My influence, if I have any, comes from connecting with people, from reflecting fundamental human experiences, not from navigating Sacramento's backrooms or bloated state bureaucracies." That last line landed like a body blow. Newsom's face tightened. The man was used to controlling the conversation, but here he was stuck on live television with someone who wasn't afraid to hit back with profound conviction. Jonathan shifted slightly, his voice gaining more force. "You call me a Hollywood script reader, Governor, but at least I've spent my career trying to portray characters of integrity and principle. Can you honestly say the same about your administration? Can you look into that camera and tell the people watching right now that your record hasn't been defined by a crushing cost of living crisis, a spiraling homelessness epidemic, and policies that seem to favor special interests over everyday Californians?" The silence in the studio was deafening. This wasn't just a counterpunch, it was a full-on offensive. He had taken Newsom's insult, amplified it, and then turned it into a public indictment of his leadership. Newsom's eyes darted to the moderator as if silently begging for a change of topic, but it was too late. The audience had already locked into the tension, and Jonathan wasn't about to let go of the moment. Now here's the thing, and think about it. In a political face-off, do you respect someone more for staying calm under fire, or for coming back twice as hard, but with a different kind of strength? Jonathan wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was going for the knockout. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, his hands resting calmly on the table, but his eyes locked on Newsom like a hawk zeroing in on prey. "Governor, the problem isn't that you don't like my tone. It's that you can't stand the truth when it's delivered without apology." The moderator tried to cut in, but Jonathan wasn't done. He spoke with the kind of pacing that made every word heavier. "California is bleeding residents to other states. Our streets are marred by unprecedented homelessness. The cost of living is crushing working families? And your answer is more regulation, more spending, and grand pronouncements that don't match the reality on the ground. You want to call me names? Fine, but you can't hide from the facts forever. The crowd was silent, leaning forward in their seats. You could feel the tension building like the air right before a thunderstorm. Newsom's expression hardened. He finally spoke. I'm not here to take acting lessons from someone who's never had to govern a state. But Jonathan cut in sharply. And I'm not here to be lectured on reality by someone whose administration has consistently failed to address the very real suffering in this state. The audience erupted, claps, shouts, even a few gasps. The moderator raised a hand trying to regain control, but it was clear Jonathan had taken command of the stage. He turned slightly toward the camera, his voice steady but cutting. People at home, ask yourselves this. Who do you trust more? Someone who speaks from a polished podium, or someone who speaks from the heart of shared experience, willing to voice uncomfortable truths, even if it challenges the established order? The question hung in the air. It wasn't just rhetoric. It was a direct challenge to both Newsom and anyone watching who still believed his narrative. Newsom shifted in his seat, clearly thrown off. He glanced toward the production crew, maybe hoping for a break, but the red light on the camera was still on. Jonathan didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just let the silence do the work. And in that silence, you could feel it. The momentum had shifted completely in his favor. The moderator finally managed to wedge in a transition, but Newsom clearly wasn't ready to move on. He leaned forward, trying to reclaim control. Mr. Roumie, you can deliver dramatic monologues all night, but governing a state of 40 million people requires more than just performance art, he said, his voice carrying that mix of irritation and condescension. Jonathan didn't flinch. He adjusted his microphone slightly, almost as if to signal he was about to make this even more uncomfortable for him. Governor, if this is your idea of leadership, it explains why California is losing residents and businesses at an alarming rate. You've burdened working families and small businesses with endless regulations and costs. You've allowed our cities to become synonymous with despair, all while celebrating California values that seem increasingly out of reach for ordinary people. The moderator tried to redirect again, but the energy in the room had shifted. The audience wanted to see where this was going. Jonathan continued, voice sharp but deliberate. You know what the people of California call this? They call it a slow-motion disaster, and they deserve better than excuses wrapped in sound bites. The crowd reacted again, some nodding, some clapping. Newsom shot back, it's easy to criticize when you've never had to balance a budget or run a state. Jonathan didn't even hesitate. And yet, Governor, despite all your experience in California's immense wealth, our state still struggles with crushing debt, a housing crisis that is unprecedented, and a quality of life that is diminishing for many. Experience means little if it consistently leads to these outcomes. That landed like a punch. Newsom looked away for a brief moment, just long enough for cameras to catch it. Jonathan turned back to the audience and the viewers at home. So I'll ask you, how many more years do you think California can survive like this? How long before the so-called leadership finally admits they've run out of excuses? His words weren't just aimed at Newsom. They were a challenge to the entire political class, and everyone in the room felt it. Newsom adjusted his tie, the move subtle but telling, a politician's reflex when the temperature in the room spikes. He tried to regain footing, his tone shifting to something meant to sound measured but edged with disdain. Mr. Roumie, you're speaking like a character in a script, not someone grounded in the realities of governance. California has faced unprecedented challenges, and unlike you, I've been in the trenches making tough calls. Jonathan tilted his head, almost amused. The look he gave wasn't friendly. It was the kind of look that says, I've been waiting for you to say that. Tough calls, Governor? Is that what you call implementing policies that drive businesses and middle-class families out of the state? Is that what you call overseeing a homelessness crisis that shocks the conscience while lecturing the rest of the nation on progressive ideals? Newsom interrupted. The issues facing California are complex. No, Governor, the cost of living is crushing communities, and you've been too busy polishing your national image to deal with it, Jonathan shot back, his words cutting through his like a knife. The audience stirred, some gasping, others murmuring their agreement. Jonathan leaned forward, his voice now low but unshakably firm. Here's the truth. California is bleeding loss, bleeding residents, and bleeding hope. And under your watch, the state's future is circling the drain. You can try to dress it up with talking points, but the people living it every day aren't fooled. Newsom's jaw tightened. He tried to respond, but Jonathan didn't give him the oxygen. And before you tell me I don't understand because I haven't sat in your chair, maybe that's the problem. Maybe the people of California need someone who isn't entrenched in the same political establishment that has overseen this decline for too long. The moderator glanced between them, clearly debating whether to step in or let the tension play out. Jonathan then turned his gaze straight into the camera, bypassing Newsom entirely. Folks at home, ask yourselves this. Do you feel safer? Do you feel more prosperous? Do you believe California is on the right track? Because if you don't, maybe it's time you stop accepting excuses from leaders who have run out of answers. It was a gut punch, not just to Newsom, but to every politician watching. Newsom tried to recover, but his pause was just a fraction too long enough for the audience to feel it. That silence, heavy and uncomfortable, was like blood in the water, and Jonathan wasn't about to let the moment slip away. "Governor," he said, his voice sharpened to precision, "you're quick to lecture me about experience, but experience doesn't mean competence. If it did, California wouldn't be seeing its middle class shrink, its streets filled with encampments, and its dreams slipping away for so many." The governor's lips twitched, but Jonathan pressed on. "You've had years, billions in taxpayer dollars, in a state rich with talent and resources. Yet under your leadership, California ranks among the worst for affordability. People are leaving in record numbers. And your solution? Blame everyone else." Newsom shifted in his seat, ready to counter, but Jonathan cut him off deliberately, surgically. "And let's talk about the people you've lost. The families who packed up because they can't afford a home, can't feel safe in their communities, or can't see a future for their children in this state. You call that progress?" A ripple went through the crowd. Even the moderator leaned forward. Newsom finally spoke. "It's easy to point fingers when you don't understand the complexities." Jonathan didn't blink. "Complexities? Governor? You keep using that word like it's a shield. But what's complex about protecting your citizens, keeping your streets safe, and making sure hardworking families can thrive? You don't need a policy brief to know when your state is failing. You just need to listen to the people living there." The tension was electric. Now he turned back to the audience, his tone almost conversational, but still razor-edged. "Here's the thing. Leadership isn't about holding a title. It's about delivering results. And if you can't, you step aside for someone who can. The people of California deserve better than excuses wrapped in political doublespeak." For a split second, the camera caught Newsom's expression. Not anger, but something far worse for a politician. The look of someone realizing they had no safe answer. The air in the studio was thick now. You could almost feel the collective inhale from the audience, as if everyone knew they were watching something they wouldn't soon forget. Newsom straightened his tie, the practiced smile on his face slipping into something more guarded. "Let me be clear," he began, leaning toward the microphone. "California has faced challenges, yes, but under my leadership," Jonathan cut in again, his tone calm but unyielding. "Challenges, Governor? What you call challenges are the direct results of failed decisions. Crushing housing costs, businesses fleeing, and a general sense of despair that's becoming a signature of this state. That's not bad luck, that's bad leadership." A murmur swept through the crowd. Even those who weren't political junkies could sense the shift. Newsom's attempt to steer the conversation back to safer territory had been intercepted mid-flight. "You talk about progress," Jonathan continued, eyes locked on him, every word deliberate. "But what does progress mean to a single mother in Los Angeles who can't afford rent, even working 2 jobs? What does progress mean to the small business owner drowning in regulations while competitors in neighboring states thrive?" Newsom attempted a counterattack, his voice rising slightly. "It's easy to criticize without offering solutions." Jonathan didn't flinch. "I've offered them. You just don't like them because they require accountability, something that's been missing from your administration since day one." There it was, the word that hit harder than any statistic. Accountability. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping just enough to make the audience lean forward. "Governor, you have one job: to protect and serve the people of California. If you can't do that without excuses, then it's time for someone else to try him. The people are tired of speeches, they want results." The camera caught Newsom's reaction again, a flicker of frustration masked by a politician's grin. But the damage was done. The crowd's energy had shifted. "You can dismiss me as a script reader all you want," Jonathan added, referring back to his earlier jab. But the truth is, I'm not here to protect my ego. I'm here to protect the people you've let down. The moderator's eyes darted between them, clearly aware they were far beyond the planned talking points. The studio felt less like a political discussion and more like a courtroom where the jury, the public, was already leaning toward a verdict. By now, the tension was no longer simmering. It was boiling over. Newsom's voice carried that defensive edge politicians get when they know they've lost control of the narrative but can't admit it. You keep painting this picture of California as if it's falling apart, he said, his hands moving in wide gestures. But you ignore the investments we've made in infrastructure, in education, in green energy. Jonathan raised a hand slightly, not to interrupt rudely, but with the precision of someone about to deliver a surgical strike. Governor, investments aren't the same as results. You can pour billions into a system, but if homelessness is up, taxes are crushing families, and jobs are leaving, then that money isn't fixing the problem. It's feeding it. There was a subtle shift in the audience, the kind where people start nodding, glancing at each other as if to say, he's got a point. Newsom tried again. Look, Mr. Roumie, I understand you have your talking points. Talking points? Jonathan's eyebrows arched. Governor, I don't need talking points to describe reality. The single mom who works 2 jobs and still can't afford rent in this state, she's not a talking point. The small business owner who closes his doors after 20 years because of your regulations and costs, he's not a talking point. These are real people paying the price for your failed leadership. The moderator shifted uncomfortably in his chair. This was no longer a polite debate. It was a public dismantling. Newsom tried to lean into empathy, the classic political reset button. I care deeply about the people of California. Jonathan cut him off, but his tone wasn't loud. It was sharp. If you cared deeply, you'd listen instead of lecture. You'd admit where you failed instead of hiding behind slogans, and you'd stop labeling your critics as mere entertainers when they point out the truth. The line landed like a punch, and Newsom's forced smile vanished for just a moment. He leaned in slightly, his voice steady but charged. Governor, you called me a Hollywood script reader. Fine, but while you're busy coming up with nicknames, I'm coming up with solutions. And here's one for you. Start leading or step aside for someone who will. A low rumble of applause broke out, even though it wasn't supposed to. The kind of reaction that isn't planned, but erupts when people hear something that hits home. The camera caught Newsom blinking as if weighing whether to push back harder or cut his losses. But in that moment, everyone watching in the studio and at home could see it. Jonathan had taken the room. Newsom straightened his posture, clearly trying to regain the upper hand. Mr. Roumie, you're good at sound bites, he said, a faint smirk on his face. But governing isn't about throwing punches on TV. It's about building consensus and making tough decisions that not everyone will like. Jonathan didn't flinch. In fact, he almost smiled because he could sense he had just given him the opening he wanted. Governor, consensus is a fine thing when the house isn't on fire. But when families are being priced out, when homelessness is making our cities unlivable, and when businesses are fleeing your state, you don't form a committee, you act. Newsom's eyes narrowed and the moderator jumped in to redirect. Let's keep this focused on solutions. Governor, you've proposed. Hold on, Jonathan interjected, his voice calm but resolute. Before we talk solutions, let's talk accountability, because you can't fix a problem you refuse to acknowledge. The audience went silent. You could almost hear the studio lights buzzing. You called me a Hollywood script reader, a cute line, but here's the truth. I've worked for everything I have. I didn't inherit a political machine. I didn't have billionaire family connections. I started as a New Yorker who found my calling in telling stories, in bringing humanity to the screen, and earned my place in this room through hard work, grit, and showing up every single day. And maybe that's why I can see what you can't, because I've lived in the real world you keep ignoring. That last sentence hit hard. Even the moderator leaned back slightly, as if realizing they had just crossed into territory that couldn't be smoothed over. Newsom opened his mouth to reply, but Jonathan kept going, his voice tightening like a coiled spring. Governor, you've had years to prove your leadership. And what do we have? Higher costs, rampant homelessness, lower trust. People are voting with their feet and they're leaving California in record numbers. That's not a partisan talking point. That's census data. Facts don't care about your slogans. A ripple of applause started, this time louder and longer. The moderator tried to move to the next topic, but Jonathan wasn't done. And here's the kicker, Governor. he said, leaning forward slightly, locking eyes with him. If you spent half as much time fixing your state as you do coming up with insults for people like me, California might actually be a place people want to stay. The applause exploded. The camera cut to Newsom, whose jaw tightened as he tried to smile through it. It didn't work. The optics were brutal. Jonathan had just dismantled his credibility live, and everyone knew it. For a few seconds, the governor stayed silent, clearly weighing whether to swing back or cut his losses. In the end, he simply muttered, "We'll let the voters decide," and looked down at his notes. But the damage was done. Jonathan didn't just win the exchange, he owned it. The moderator glanced at the clock, signaling that the debate was nearing its end. "We have time for closing statements," he said, looking first to Governor Newsom. Newsom leaned into the microphone, his tone slower now, more measured. "California is on a path toward progress," he began. "It's not perfect, but we've invested in our communities. We've stood up for working families, and we've defended progressive values against those who seek to divide us. My opponent here represents a politics of performance, not solutions." It was a safe, rehearsed ending, one clearly designed to avoid another clash. Then it was Jonathan's turn. He didn't look at his notes. He didn't need them. Instead, he stepped slightly forward, making direct eye contact with the camera, speaking not just to the room but to everyone watching at home. "Governor Newsom says California is on a path toward progress. But let's be honest, the only progress people are feeling is the progress of their bills going up, their security going down, and their neighbors packing up moving trucks." There was a murmur from the audience, a mix of laughter and agreement. He says, "I represent performance, but what I represent is a reflection of reality, because leadership without genuine connection is just a monologue, and California doesn't need more monologues, it needs action." He paused, letting that sink in. "I've dedicated my life to telling stories, to embodying characters who speak truth, who struggle, who believe. If speaking the truth about California's struggles, if fighting for its people, if expecting genuine leadership is playing a role, then yes, I'm guilty. But here's the thing, I won't apologize for expecting better. I won't apologize for calling out failure when I see it. And I won't apologize for standing up to anyone, whether it's the media, the political establishment, or even a governor with unlimited resources and an army of advisors." The camera cut to Newsom, whose polite smile was starting to strain again. "Governor," he said, turning toward him directly, "you can call me names all day, but at the end of the day, the people watching tonight know the truth. You've had your chance. And California can't afford another 4 years of these excuses." That line drew the loudest applause of the night, the kind that seemed to shake the room. Jonathan turned back to the audience, his voice steady but sharp. "This isn't about left or right, it's about right and wrong. And if you're tired of watching politicians get rich while your state gets poorer, then maybe it's time to stop rewarding failure and start demanding results, because you deserve better and you know it." The moderator thanked both candidates, but the applause was still echoing as the cameras began to fade out. Newsom gave a tight nod while Jonathan smiled just enough to convey one thing. He knew he just landed the knockout blow. Tonight wasn't about winning an argument. It was about bearing witness to the truth. And the truth is, California is at a crossroads. You've been told things are getting better, but you feel in your gut that they're not. Your streets aren't safer, your wallets aren't fuller, and your leaders aren't listening. Governor Newsom can throw every label in the book at me, but I'm not here for his critique. I'm here for yours, the people of California, because you deserve leaders who fight for your homes, your safety, your future, not just for their political legacy or their next national appearance. If you're tired of excuses, tired of photo ops, tired of watching politicians protect their image instead of your future, then this is your moment. Stand with me. Let's demand better. Let's take our state back together. I am Jonathan Roumie, and I believe we can write a better story for California.